So for week 2 for the new Star Beginner Quilt Course, we are going to be cutting your fabrics out for your quilts. So in the videos, you're actually going to see me cutting this quilt fabric out, and this is being cut in the larger size. So I do remind every once in a while as I'm cutting what size I'm cutting and what size you're cutting for the cover quilt, but just keep that in mind. I wanted to talk about how to know what you're cutting. If you're cutting the cover quilt, subbing in fabrics like this for the cover quilt, or custom designing your own quilt, which you should have done for fabric in week 1. So you should have a coloring sheet of a custom designed quilt, or for your cover quilt in the colors you're using. So if you are doing the cover quilt exactly with the same colors, awesome. You can then go into your page 7, which is cutting instructions, and you are going to use the cover quilt, which includes HST border section here, to cut all these pieces out. Piece A, cut 16, piece B, cut 128 from the star fabric. So in the cover quilt, that's this fabric. And then background color 1, which it says purple fabric. So in the cover quilt, you can see anywhere there's purple fabric is background color number 1. And you're going to cut piece C and piece D, and those pieces, the amount you need from each. Background color 2, pink fabric. Wherever there's pink fabric in the quilt, those are the pieces you're going to cut. Background color 3, dark blue fabric. Wherever there's dark blue fabric, you'll cut those pieces. And then light blue fabric for background color number 4. Wherever there's light blue is where those pieces go. The difference is if you are making anything scrappy, we kind of talked about that in fabric. For instance, for the dark blue fabric, I made it scrappy in my quilt. So what I did is, once I knew how many different prints I was using for the dark blue fabric, I divided each quantity that I needed to cut by that many prints. I used, I believe, 12-ish prints. Let's just say 12 prints. And I needed 96 PC. So I'm going to divide 96 by 12 to get how many pieces from each print I cut, which is what? 8. So you would need 8 pieces of each dark blue print you're using if you're using 12 prints in sub of a single dark blue fabric. And then you can do that for anything. In the cover quilt, my pink fabrics were a single fabric per block with pink, but I used a different fabric here, a different fabric there, a different fabric here. I think I had 5 fabrics, so I did repeat a few. And that's why I give you the single block cutting, so that you can, if you want to just do a single pink fabric in one block, you know how many of that fabric you need for a single block. And then you can do it that way as well. You could do this every block that has the pink, make the pink or the purple a different pink or purple from the other blocks. Just an example. For the single block cutting list, you have for the 15-inch block, which is 3-inch finished squares, and the 20-inch block, which is 4-inch finished squares. Cut at 4.5, and the 3-inch finished squares are cut at 3.5. That does not show you this block, but I think you can figure out, if you're kind of looking at the different blocks, you can say, okay, if I was doing this block and I was cutting 1, I would need so-and-so. Like, I think you can kind of sub in the one block for the next. So I wanted to pull, this is, if I was using a single fabric for my cover quilt, this is the exact fabrics I would be using. And if you are subbing in different fabrics but doing the exact same cover quilt, this is how you would do it. You would pull the 5 fabrics you want to use, and you would color your coloring sheet in like this, and use the colors you want to use from the fabrics you pulled. So I place these in direct correlation. The light blue of the cover quilt is swapping with a black. The yellow stars of the cover quilt is swapping with a brown. The purple of the cover quilt is swapping with a green. The blue of the cover quilt is swapping with the blue, and the pink of the cover quilt is swapping with a low volume. And so what I would do personally is on my fabric requirement page and where I'm cutting things out, my cutting instruction page 7, I would slash out purple fabric and I would write in green fabric, slash out pink fabric, write in white fabric, slash out dark blue fabric, write in blue fabric, slash out light blue fabric, write in brown fabric, slash in star fabric, and write out yellow or black fabric. That's how I would keep track of my cutting list. Once you have a base like this is going back to picking fabric, you could decide, oh, I want to make, let's say the green color scrappy. So I'm going to go pick a bunch of different greens. And then I'm just going to note where my green fabric goes, which is the purple one. I'm going to say I have, let's say 20 green prints. And then I will know, after I do a little bit of math, I can also note in this dead space here just how many of each of those 20 green prints I'm going to cut to total my total amount that I need. So that's how you're going to cut. Now, if you are doing the larger size blocks, still doing the cover quilt at this point, but subbing in to use the larger size squares, you're going to take these numbers down here and just sub them in for up here. Wherever you have a piece A, instead of cutting this dimension, you're going to cut this dimension, and so on down the line. If you are specifically just cutting those sizes, you could just slash through and write that size there instead. Often, if I am saving a printed pattern, I will just put it in a binder, and then if I ever go back to reuse it, I might reprint the cutting page, because I often make a lot of notes on the cutting page while I'm cutting based on that specific quilt. Now, if you are doing a custom quilt, you have to figure out what you're cutting for a custom quilt. So I am going to pull this because this is the quilt I'm actually cutting out in the cutting videos when I'm cutting. And this is what you're going to do a custom quilt on. Now, you could decide to do the exact size of cover quilt and just color in so you have a different design on the cover quilt side. Totally fine to do it that way. If you're making a different size quilt with a different design, this is the page you would do. You're going to color it in, something similar to this. I did use a program for this. I just like to say that because the coloring is like perfect, and that's not how I would color. And figuring out how much you need to cut of each piece is very similar to figuring out how much fabric you need, because you need to know, you've probably already done the calculations to figure out how many squares of each color. So we have dark blue chains, which goes here, and we know we need 64 squares. So we know if our dark blue chains are in the main block, based on what square size we're using, we know we need to cut those at either 3.5 or 4.5. So on this blank area up here, depending where you wrote it for your fabric requirements, I use the back of my pages a lot. You could use a separate page. You might have all these written out to know and have figured out fabric yardage. You're going to use those same numbers, and you are going to cut that amount from the size square that these numbers represent. So, for instance, these light blue points, we know that those are the points of the stars. And if we look on the cut instruction, page 7, we can see those are piece B, and then we know what size to cut those. This is, remember, these dimensions are for the 3-inch finished block. These dimensions are for the 4-inch finished block. So then you could even, somewhere in a blank area, you can write piece B, cut, and how many of those you're going to need based on the size of your quilt and how you laid it out. Every block should have 8 piece Bs because every block has a star. And then you're going to continue going through all your fabrics. So I did just want to note here that piece D in the cut list is the HST border. So when you're cutting out piece D's, those are what you are cutting for the HSTs, because you will make those from larger squares and trim them down. And there is no piece D on any labeled diagram on the cut list. This is a good example of why at the beginning of the pattern I suggest reading through the whole pattern before you get started, so you can note any little discrepancies like this. It's sometimes hard to remember all of the information I need to relay to you as a pattern designer when I'm writing it, and that reading can really help. Once you have all of your different colors noted for what size or what piece they are and how many of each for your custom design quilt, then you can get into cutting. And the other videos for this week are going to be talking all about / showing you how exactly to cut out the fabric.